All right, so we're back here in the park, and I was thinking of taking you along what I'm doing or what I'm going to be doing, which is studying for exams. Because teaching is a really good method of remembering something or learning, you should say. And also because maybe the way that I summarize some of the stuff might help you out. Yeah, this is something new, and because I don't know where to start, so I'm just winging it, and hopefully I'll get used to how I want to record. Right now I have my laptop right here. Shit. I have my laptop right here, and I'm gonna read some of the stuff before, and then I'll try and explain it to you. Too long of an introduction. Fuck, bro, I speak too much. Obesity is a topic for today. Obesity is a diet-related condition which drives three of the most important conditions that affect the human body. First of them is cardiovascular diseases. The second is cancer, and third is diabetes. Now, uh, to simply explain what obesity is, the the simplest answer is the amount of food that you intake versus the amount that you actually the amount that you actually use. So basically, you have a imbalance of absorption and consumption. I don't know if that makes sense. But you eat more, but your body is not using it, so it gets stored up. That is what's obesity. Now, we're talking about obesity, so we have to talk about adipocytes or adipose tissues. Adipose tissues are the tissues in your body which store lipids, and lipids is one of the three uh, components or building blocks, you can say, for energy and construction of various things in your body. Now, there are two types of adipose tissues or adipocytes. Adipose tissues are made up of can be made up of two types of cells. We have the white adipocytes and we have the brown adipocytes. The white adipocytes are found mostly in adults, while the brown adipocytes are found in younger children. The difference between them is white adipocytes don't have the uncoupling proteins. Adaptive thermogenesis is your body adapting to your environment when you stay in it for too long. Although brown adipocytes have more mitochondria that are active, and there are multiple lipid vacuoles instead of a single lipid vacuole in the white adipocytes, the brown adipocytes have these uncoupling proteins that I already mentioned. The uncoupling proteins present in brown adipocytes dissipate or produce an imbalance in the proton gradient in the mitochondria of the adipocytes. And because there's an imbalance in the proton gradient, the cell is not able to generate ADPs very efficiently. So what the cell must do is the cell has to work more to make the mitochondria not produce that imbalance in the proton gradient, and therefore because the cell has to work more, it has to consume more oxygen and more lipids, and because to get energy, and because the cell has to work more, each reaction makes entropy and heat, and through that heat you're producing, basically the cell is working more, but you're producing the same amount of ATPs that you need. And because the cell works more, you are creating more heat without making more ATPs. is basically an inefficient way for the cell to produce heat while also maintaining the amount of ADPs that you make. And that is like a thermogenic effect, or a thermogenic technique used by brown adipocytes. Since you only have white adipocytes and you don't have brown adipocytes, which are found in children, how do you generate more heat? And there's a theory that says that your cells are able to undergo an evolutionary change where they produce these beige adipocytes, which is not exactly brown, but it's somewhere there. And the difference is that these beige adipocytes, which are an evolutionary change, they produce these uncoupling proteins, which are also found in skeletal muscles. Skeletal muscles also produce heat by shivering. The skeletal muscles have these uncoupling proteins, which are UCP2. UCP1 is found in mitochondria, UCP2 is found in skeletal muscles, and these are what produce heat by inefficient mitochondrial ATP generation in shivering, in the process of shivering. Beige adipocytes are the adipocytes that function when your body gets adapted to the cold environment, and basically the more you condition your body to be in the cold, there's a high probability that you're producing beige adipocytes to help you fight the cold. And that is why when you live in cold environments for a very long time, your body gets used to that cold and you don't feel that cold because your body is adapted by producing those beige adipocytes. Okay, so now that we talked about that, let's talk about adipose tissues and its function as endocrine, or its correlation with the endocrine system. Now, adipose tissues are found in two spots. The first is the subcutaneous fat, which is directly under the skin, and the other is visceral fat, which is found close to organs. When the body has to compensate for the increasing number of lipids, there are two ways the body compensates for this increase in lipid molecules. One is by increasing the number of cells that store these lipids, and the other is by increasing the size of the tissues or cells that store these lipids. So we have hypertrophy and hyperplastic responses. Hypertrophic is when the body increases the size of the adipocytes, whereas the hyperplastic response is by producing more cells of adipocytes to store more lipids. Hypertrophy of adipocytes happens in visceral fat, and hyperplastic response of adipocytes is in subcutaneous fat. Now there's actually three hormones that I need to talk about. The first is insulin. Insulin directly affects the obesity and how lipids are stored in the body. Now we know that insulin is basically a glucose controller, but there's also the effect of fatty acids. Insulin has a control over fatty acids and how they are stored in the body. So we have insulin that affects lipid metabolism in the body, and then we also have two other hormones that are new. We have leptin and adiponectin. Leptin is a hormone that acts on the hypothalamic regions of the brain, and what it does is it reduces the appetite of the body to it reduces the appetite, so your body is not does not ask for you to eat more, and therefore when the body doesn't eat more, the body has to use the lipids that are already present in the body to produce energy. You would be thinking that since leptin is an appetite reducer, it could probably be used in therapy. Experiments have shown that there is a possibility of desensitization of the leptin receptor, meaning that the more through chronic therapy, the leptin hormone stops functioning, and therefore the body is not able to resist, and the therapy is non-functional anymore. Now leptin functions in two ways. Leptin first acts on the hypothalamic regions and reduces appetite by inhibiting the anorexic pathways, and they stimulate the anorexic pathways, which reduce hunger. The second way is by it activates beta oxidation and inhibits lipogenesis. So basically, the body is not trying to produce lipids, but is going to consume lipids. And here it acts opposite to insulin, where insulin is supposed to create lipids instead of consuming them. Adiponectin works by regulating the metabolism in the body, and because we are talking about energy generation, adiponectin works by activating the AMP kinase pathway, which drives the fatty acid metabolism, the glycolysis, and glucose uptake. Basically, the body, what it does is, when you're consuming more energy, you have less ADP and you have more ADP. And what the body can do is, in such conditions, is there's a reaction called there's a reaction where ADPs are converted into one ADP and one AMP through adenylate cyclase or adenylate kinase. And because AMP is produced, AMP is a signal for energy AMP signals that there's no energy, and this activates AMP kinase to produce more energy through metabolism by activating pathways that produce more energy, like glucose consumption, fatty acid oxidation, stuff like that. The problem with hypertrophic obesity is that in one cell you have a lot of lipids, you have a lot of fatty acids, and because the cell is not able to maintain the lipid content, what it does is it increases the cell size, and this can pose problems for the cells by causing cell death and inflammation, because there's damage to the adipocytes, which produces DAMPs, which are called damage associated molecular patterns, and this can induce an inflammatory reaction. Now we're going to switch to the last part of obesity, which is metabolic syndrome. Now, metabolic syndrome is a condition where, I'm going to read this part. Clinical condition where visceral obesity acts cooperatively with several downstream pathophysiological alterations. It's a bit hard to explain, but yeah. Now, although there's multiple downstream effects, visceral obesity is basically the main part that causes these downstream pathophysiological events or alterations. And these events are the visceral obesity, which is the main one, and then there is dyslipidemia or hypertriglyceridemia, decrease in LDLs, or a decrease in HDLs, or increase in LDLs. There's diabetes, and then there's a hypertensive state. Now, how obesity affects type 2 diabetes is that you have more lipids circulating in the blood vessels, and because you have more lipids, they produce metabolic stress on the tissues like skeletal muscles, livers, and pancreas. All right, this I'm having to repeat this shit for multiple times because I'm getting it wrong. All right. Peripheral tissues are downregulating the insulin signaling pathway, whereas pancreas are producing more insulin. We are upregulating the insulin signaling, and because the cells are not uptaking the lipids, where because they're insulin resistant, lipids are still circulating in the bloodstream, and because they also pass through the pancreas, the lipids have a toxic effect on the beta cells of the pancreas, which are producing insulin. And because the lipids are not being uptaken, this toxicity lasts for a little bit longer than needed, and this can lead to the destruction of the beta cells, which is the core effect of type 2 diabetes. Hyperglycemia affects cardiovascular events because um, the the circulating lipids in the bloodstream are being glycated because because the insulin is not working, so glucose is also not being uptaken, and because glucose is glycating the lipids that are also not being uptaken, the glycated lipoproteins are are very high. Our glycated lipoproteins are basically the driver for atherosclerosis, which we'll talk about